Welcome to this video in risk response and monitoring. Now that we have performed our risk assessment, we have our result. Now we need to make decision. We need to respond to those risks. And on CISSP exam, you are going to be asked question in which they expect you to respond to risk. Also how to monitor and measure them and to try to improve them as best as possible. And all risk response really is a decision. It's a decision on how you are going to address the specific risk. Now keep in mind that this is management's job. This is organizational management, senior management, business owners, whatever you want to call them. This is their decision because they are the ones who are going to have to spend the money. Now they are also the one that are going to have to invest the labor, all the resources necessary, and also be responsible and accountable for the decision being made here. So once all the pieces of the puzzle are collected, we are going to evaluate the list of findings. We are going to look at all the possible threats and risk, the rates of occurrence, the exposure factors, the likelihood, the cost benefit analysis, all that data that we collected as part of our assessment. And now we got to make a decision. And normally the most common response that you see is risk mitigation. And I chuckled because this is what we all do. We know the risk is there. It's little higher than we like. It exceeds our level of tolerance, our risk tolerance. And now we want to reduce that to an acceptable level where we are happy. We do this all the time. We do this when we are shopping for things. Oh, that's a little high. Oh, that's little expensive. It's on sale. Okay, now I'll do it. So it's down to an acceptable level in which you will purchase the product. Now that's not necessarily risk, but it's the same mindset. This is too much for me to accept. Now if I get it down to this level, now I am good with it. So this is all based on your tolerance level. You can also assign the risk, which is you assign it to insurance agency, a managed service provider, something like that. You are giving the risk responsibility to someone else and making them accountable for that risk. There's also risk deterrence, where you implement deterrent control in order to reduce the risk. This is also part of the risk mitigation as well. Is implementing control, different control to influence how that risk might be reduced to an acceptable level. There's also avoidance, where we don't introduce change that might increase risk. Going back to the example I used in my previous video, I talked about a web server. What if we don't install that web server? Then we are not at risk at all. So we reduce that risk by not doing it. So we avoid it in this regard. And then risk acceptance, which by the way, we are going to, no matter what we are doing, no matter what, we are always accepting the consequences of something. When we reduce risk to an acceptable level, there is a still risk. So we are accepting that level of risk. If we do nothing, knowing a risk exists, then we are accepting the consequences of not doing anything about it. So we are accepting that risk at that point. And once we make the decision, we need to make sure that we made that right decision. So we need to monitor it over time. We need to verify that response and the implementation that went with that response is going to be effective and is also going to help us maintain compliance if we are required to do so. So when we are monitoring, we are making sure that risk decision was effective, that the controls we have put in place, the setting we made, the configuration changes, the firewall we installed, the IDS, IPS, all the different buzzwords we would use are effective in our response to that risk. And we also want to make sure that if we are required to be compliant, that risk decision is within the compliance, and that risk response has to trace back to those policies, laws, regulation. We cannot make this up. It has to have some kind of governance behind it. So we need to be consistent with that governance to again show due care and due diligence in the event that the risk become realized. We also want to update the responses. Just because we install a firewall doesn't mean that we should not go take a look at the firewall and create a new rules to our create new policies or disable interface or add new interface or whatever that might be. So we want to make sure that risk response remain updated and effective for the organizational policy and security posture. We also want to do a follow-up assessment or follow-on analysis. Just because we have done once doesn't mean we are done. Continuous improvement is part of the process. We want to continuously be aware of our security posture. So once maybe we have that web server, we install that web application firewall. Okay, great. How about next week? We do another analysis. Let's make sure that it's solid. Let's make sure that it's good. Let's look at the data that we have. Let's look at the logs in the firewall. Let's look at the logs in the web server. Let's see what kind of activity is happening, because maybe we underestimated the rate of occurrence. Maybe we underestimated the likelihood. So now we do that follow on to make sure that we made the right decision, and continuous improvement is part of that. We have to adapt our risk management to the organizational and technical changes that are happening. Now that we have one web server and we have web app firewall on there and we are confident with it, what if we are adding software tomorrow? What if we add another application on that web server? What if we add more interfaces to that web server? We have to adopt those risk decisions to those different changes. So as technology and the organization change, we have to change with it. And that's part of the due diligence. We want to perform that cost benefit analysis as well. So as the changes come in, what does that do to our risk response? Does that increase the cost? Does that maybe increase the benefit? So we need to look at those things and make sure that those controls are still performing as expected. And then we want to update any risk response with any new information that we have coming in, and then again repeat that monitoring process and just continue this. Risk management is really a life cycle, if you will. It continuously goes over and over. We never want to just do it once and forget about it. We want to constantly keep aware of what's going on within the security posture and also within the organization. And one of the way that we can do this is to use risk maturity model. And as you can see, you have a qualitative risk analysis chart sitting right here, and you have all of your risk mapped out. You can monitor them, and the reason this is important is the risk ages. It matters over time. So what was the risk last month, maybe bigger this month, or it might be less depending on the organizational change, technical changes, discoveries in the industry, new vulnerabilities, things like that. So as you can see, the qualitative analysis make it very effective for monitoring risk over time. This chart here is sometimes called heat map, and the reason they call it that is when you are in the hot area, which is the red, you want to stay out of that. You want to stay in a cool areas. The green, it should be blue to be honest, but the green and the light green are sometimes yellow within your risk tolerance. But if you are in the orange and red, these are the risks that you need to spend a lot of time with and try to reduce them down to an acceptable level. Get them back in the green. So using tools like risk maturity model, performing quick assessment, qualitative assessment, or analysis when things change can really help the organization stay aware and also maintain due care and due diligence. So the bottom line for this lesson is to know each of the risk response and when they are used. Understand the purpose of risk monitoring, understand the purpose of continuous improvement, as well as using the risk maturity model.